I want to thank all of our listeners for several years of dedicated and loyal listening throughout the Halo Talks 400 podcast completed to date. We're going to 1,000 by 2024. If you're so inclined, we'd love to have you go to iTunes for us, fill out a review so we can keep this podcast rolling globally. We are now on Chartable's top lists and moving up the charts. Also, if you want to educate yourself in the new year, please go to thehaloacademy.com. Take a look at what we've done with 150 executives in the Halo sector to get them smarter, get them prepared for capital raises, and also more winning. Thanks. Have a great season. Let's go. This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks. I have the pleasure of bringing my friend from Emory University, freshman year, now a qualified and guru coach for corporations across the land. Rachel Begun, welcome to your first Halo Talks.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here and to reconnect in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we were not as professional as we are today, so we'll try and keep that professionalism up for 25 minutes. But you've come from an interesting background. Maybe you could give your history of working and then kind of what led you to say, you know what, hey, I'm good at what I do, but I'm even better, helping other people get to the next level.
Yeah, I definitely have an interesting background. So thank you for asking that question. So my background, I started as a nutritionist, after Emory. I was pre-med at Emory, and I took 3 years off and to work before going back to graduate school for nutrition. And I knew during that time, I was kind of making the connection between having a fascination and passion for nutrition with communications. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time because nobody was really doing it at the time. But I went back to school for nutrition. I got my master's in nutrition education. And then I also became a registered dietitian. So you have to go through a whole internship program for that. And my first job out of graduate school was to work at a PR agency, a boutique agency, and all of our clients were focused on food and nutrition. So we were really all about using nutrition science as the foundation for communicating and promoting about our clients' products and services. And that's really where I got my feet wet. And so from there, I, the first part of my career was in-house as a corporate executive. And I basically was working with a global contract food service manufacturer, so a huge company. I also worked with a regional family-owned food and wine retailer, so got that experience. And I also worked with a natural food brand startup. And so I basically started as the initial PR/communication/consumer affairs person. And we took that all the way through to a sale. And so went through that whole strategic exit process, which was a huge learning experience. And from there, I just really felt like I'd worked in different environments, from big companies to startups to family owned. Like I had a different array of experiences there. And then I started my own communications firm back in 2009. And I took that all the way through until 21 when I became an executive coach and just worked with a lot of different food companies. I would say a majority of food brands like consumer packaged good products, but also health advocacy organizations, media publications, various aspects where food and nutrition was really the focus of the communications. And in addition, I was also, being an expert. I was, educating the public through the media. That was kind of, a parallel course to what I was doing. It's also what brought in business to the communications firm. And then I started realizing, the latter part of my business, like 2015 to like 2020, I was working with a lot of founders, and I was starting to kind of bring in more of the aspect of communications from the perspective of asking them the powerful questions like, what kind of culture do you want to build? What kind of leader do you want to be? What is the purpose of your existence? Because I felt like that was such a really powerful part of the communications platform. And I started realizing through that, what I was most passionate about was helping companies, founders, executives, teams to build their companies and their organizations and their cultures.
Yeah. So when you look back to being at the PR firm, were you the most educated person there, or was everyone else, also kind of, certified nutritionist and actually understood the underlying ingredients? Or were you able to kind of tell other people, like, look, like they say this isn't better for you, but let me tell you why it isn't? Because it seems like a unique kind of, education set to be in PR.
Yes, that is a great question. I'm glad you picked up on that. So no, when I first started, there were very few people. There were very few people with a nutrition dietitian background that were working in PR. And
Yeah.
so when I got to the agency that I was working with, there was only one other dietitian.
Perfect.
And so I was just one of two people. Everybody else they were PR professionals,
Right. Right.
obviously a passion for the food, but I was the only dietitian along with this other woman. And we basically, we were exactly what you said. We were the ones that brought the legitimacy, the understanding of the science to incorporate that into the platforms that we were building.
Yeah. I feel like, that you could hire people from the outside and they could say, hey, I could explain or I could get your message out. But when you have the authenticity of understanding that the message is real, I would suspect that the PR also comes across as more authentic.
Absolutely.
Um,
And
you know,
that's actually what you just said is the crux of the business of what I did, both internally and for my own business, is that we brought the third party credibility to our clients' products and services. So we brought on the doctors, the nurses, the dietitians to be spokespeople. We brought them on as advisors for scientific advisory boards, and we managed those boards. We brought in scientists oftentimes to do the food science aspect and bring that knowledge piece to developing the products in the R&D process. So we were very much the people that brought in the third party experts, whether it was if they were clinicians or they were researchers or they were, whatever their practical focus was, we brought them in to bring legitimacy to all parts of the client's business.
yeah, I feel like a lot of, and this kind of is more related to digital marketing, but I think a lot of companies just hire digital marketing firms and don't necessarily kind of go in and say, like, who's on the team? What's their background? What do they know? What clients have they worked with before? Because people start to get a way of communicating that is much more unique, and understanding the client and asking these questions that you're talking about. What's your why? Why is this better for, a potential client or a member or a customer? So I think that may be one takeaway here just early on for our listener base. Do the research on who you're outsourcing to, and don't just assume that if they have a slick website and they say they could get this return on marketing dollars. That's not necessarily, the end of the conversation on the selection process. So that's good to know. So I didn't know that about you in the past. So that's great. When you started to realize that you were really like a coach wearing like PR clothing, when did, was there like an aha moment, or was there a CEO saying like, Rachel, like I kind of didn't expect you to be asking me these questions, or I'm not really sure why you're the one I'm listening to, but I'm listening to you the most? Well, what happened?
That's exactly what happened, what you just said. So the story that I'm going to tell you, coaching wasn't even on my radar at that point. What was on my radar was that I was kind of ready to be doing something different. I didn't know exactly what that was. I knew my passion was working with founders and founding teams and executives too in more established companies. But what happened was I was working with two women who were the founders of a company, a sustainable food company. And, we were going through the initial stages of that communications building process. And we had our day of me asking those powerful questions and the team kind of digging into that. And a couple of days later, a week later, I get a call from them and they were like, will you be our coach? And
Right.
I was like, well, I'm not a coach. I don't have any training as a coach. So my initial answer to that is I don't think that's a good idea. I think you deserve somebody who's better, well trained. And they said, well, we really just enjoyed that process you brought us through because the questions you asked made us think about our business in a very different way. They
Eh,
made us, they made us think about the culture of our business in a very different way. And we just really resonated with that. And that was kind of the aha moment for me where I was like, I think I'm going to start like researching and checking into this coaching thing. And that is what started the process. And I went through probably a good year of learning more about coaching, meeting with my own coach, and then also looking at certification programs.
wow, that's great. As you take a look at coaching, and there's obviously it's an industry that I would say it's not as well defined as other industries. There's coaches for different flavors. There's coaches of, hey, I'm going to check in with you once a week. I'm going to check in with you once a month. I'm going to give you like a nice wheel of like, here's your priorities for the quarter. I'm going to be a motivator, and I'm going to kind of fall back and I'm going to charge you, a couple $100 a month or what have you. So when you sort of said, hey, I'm going all in on this, and I don't necessarily want to take on 40 clients and kind of be, like check in like a babysitter. How did you kind of calibrate? All right, I need X amount of clients to go all in on this. Like, here's the value or the price to value of what I'm providing. And also, obviously, you got a lot of startup companies that can't necessarily afford to bring you on at the rate that you deserve. So how did you kind of like go through that maze to say, all right, this is what my value is on a per hour basis. At the same time, I'm going to kind of follow my gut to what feels like people I can help and what I think can turn into a big company.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll start by saying while I certainly love working with founders and entrepreneurs, you're right. It's harder for them to find the dollars and the budget to work with a coach. But there are I've tended to kind of work with private equity firms, venture capital firms, the people that are kind of supporting these entrepreneurs who are starting to understand the value of coaching. So that's like certainly a way to get to these clients and for them to see the value of coaching and
Mhm.
what it can do for their business. So I've also worked with this is a big funnel for me for getting clients. There are consulting agencies. I obviously know the food industry very well. So I've worked with a couple of food accelerators where they're providing consulting services. It might be operating consulting. It might be consulting for marketing and sales. I've paired up with a couple of them to kind of be like their coach of preference to refer clients to, so I get clients that way as well. But to answer your question about how I charge and what my model is, you know, I'm not a, I've never, I knew from the very beginning and having run a PR firm that, charging by the hour was, then you're getting paid for your time. You're not getting paid
Right.
for value. And we all know there's only so many hours in the day and you're never really, not that you can't make a living that way, but I always felt like it was very important to ask people for my value and not my time. And so I approach it that way. I'm very fluid about how I work with clients as far as I'm not going to say to them, you have to work with me for 6 months and this is what it costs. It's more that I more go to them and say, what is your goal? What is your timeline? Um, what is your budget? And let's figure it out together. And it's more of a collaborative process rather than me saying, I do a 10-week program, I do a 6-week program, and this is what it costs. It's more of a discussion and a collaboration.
Got it. So, I've been an entrepreneur, several times, and being an entrepreneur is a pretty lonely place, right? Because you got to kind of show your team and the market that, hey, yeah, I'm winning every week. And the reality is that certain things might not be working out. And I got to put that face forward. And then I got to, maybe keep that all inside because I really don't have anyone that I can necessarily, you know, bounce this off of because they might be somewhere in the inner circle. And I don't want to show any weakness. So, as kind of society has evolved over the last 10 years, where it's okay to tell people you have a weakness. It's okay to tell people like, I'm bipolar. Or it's okay to tell people that, things aren't going great. how do you kind of say like, yeah, okay, that's kind of like what society's going, but let you and I talk and let's see if I can help you maintain that kind of, wall of optimism, and let you and I work on this on the back end without you maybe being too transparent. I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but I feel like there might be a little too much push for transparency, and maybe just a push towards, hey, I'm your coach. We're going to deal with this. And when you're on the field, you're going to play at an optimal level, and we're going to deal with it on, post game or pre game. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like there's a little bit of, movement in society that might not favor the entrepreneur.
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple of things I can say about all of this. And if I'm kind of going in a direction that doesn't, is not what you're asking, just let me know. But I would say, well, a couple of things that, there's this term called coachability, right? And that
Yep.
means, you know, to be coachable, you really have to be willing to do the introspection and the work. Like a coach can't do it for you. A coach is there to guide you with the right questions and challenge you and all of those things. But a coach doesn't tell you what to do. It has to come from within. And you can only do that if you're being honest with yourself, and you can only be honest with yourself if you're doing the introspection. So there's that piece of it that I will say. As far as the transparency, and I think you mean being transparent with other people about what your weaknesses are. Is that correct?
Correct.
So um, this actually came. I'm using words that came out of a conversation that I heard on one of Adam Grant's podcasts, and it made so much sense, which is just this idea of, and I forget who he was talking to, but it's just this idea of, you know, vulnerability, which is partly transparency, vulnerability about what your weaknesses are, what you might be going through that's a hard time, can be a strength, and can be, people can see you in a much greater light if you show them your vulnerability. But vulnerability comes with credibility. So, like, you can't come to an audience completely unknown, having no background with them, and then like cry your eyes out for 15 minutes and be
Right.
vulnerable. You might not get through. But if you've already established your credibility, and that may be as an expert, that may be as a CEO and as a leader to your team, it can be whatever scenario. But once you've established credibility, vulnerability actually can get you really far as far as,
Fair point.
yeah.
Yes. Gotcha. Okay. That's good. That's what I was looking for guidance on. Because I feel like there are certain, you can't be Jerry Maguire all the time unless you've built up to the point where people understand, okay, here's my strengths, here's my weaknesses. I'm going to expose to you some of my weaknesses or things that are of concern to me, but the boat's not going to sink.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. Like I've got a path, or I've got a trampoline, or we've got a plan
Yeah.
to do that.
And it's also, that's what teams are for, right? I mean, yes, like you was talking about an entrepreneur, especially if they're literally just the one person and they haven't built a team yet. I mean, that's a different story, but they still have people that they're working with. That's the whole point of having a team, is that some people are better at one thing than the other. And you have complementary skill sets. And that's part of being a leader, is identifying who on your team is better at this versus that, and delegating. So, it's also positioning it as, not so much as a weakness, as in, we all help each other, and this is where you're better at it than I am.
Right. One of the chapters in the book is one of the first chapter is pay for talent. And, like you've got to really bring on solid team members if you want to build a real team and build a real business. As you've looked at probably hundreds of entrepreneurial companies, a lot of entrepreneurs, maybe the second pick in the draft besides themselves is like the first pick. They might pick a spot that might be like a defensive spot. They might say, hey, I've got this business, I've got this great food, packaged good, I got a great brand, I'm going to go hire a CFO. And they probably should have hired like a head of sales, or they probably should have hired a marketing person. So, when you go in and look at a company and diagnose and say, hey, look, I see where your areas are. I can look at your financials. I can see where your market penetration is. Where do you kind of typically see that either that was a mistake, or like that sequentially was not the right next hire?
Yeah. I think I think what it comes down to, as a coach, I'm not telling people what to do from a hiring perspective, where we can examine it and ask them the hard questions. And I think really what it comes down to is, if you look at it from the perspective of what your end goal is, and your goals are changing dramatically and dynamically as an entrepreneur, right? It's not like an established company,
Sure.
and even established companies these days, like setting goals is an extremely dynamic process in these days. But bringing it back more to the entrepreneur, which is if you're really in tune with what the problem is that you're trying to solve, the next step becomes really it's much if you're looking at your business not from the end game perspective, like if you're an entrepreneur and you're going into business thinking purely about your end game, you're not going to have the innate guidance that you need. If you go in saying, this is the purpose we want to serve, this is the problem we're trying to solve, and you're always looking at it from that perspective, it's a lot more clear. And if your team knows that too, it's a lot more clear what your next step is. And then is it a salesperson that you need to hire? Is it an operations person that you need to hire? So I find that the companies that get in trouble are the ones that are only thinking about the end game and they're not thinking about the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are some companies that, without naming names, um, they come up with a product or they come up with a service. And I'll give you an example. There was someone that came to me and says, "Hey, I'm going to open up this natural foods cafe and grocery, and let's just call it like downtown Nashville. It's an underserved market." And I said to him, "Where do you live in Nashville?" He's like, "I don't live in Nashville. I live in Brooklyn." It's like you got to like own that community, and you've got to like be in it to win it. Are there some times when you get called into something, maybe it's not on a venture capital or private equity deal, because maybe they vetted this yet, where you kind of say, you know what, like you might give this a swing, but I don't really see kind of what you're solving. And I'm not really sure if you should do this, because a lot of entrepreneurs, there are more people that want to sell their company than want to buy their company.
Yep.
That's just how it is, right? So you see certain entrepreneurs that have been in a deal for 10 years and they're just like, I got to get out of this, or I should have just shut this down a long time ago. Do you ever get into those kind of hard conversations with like, look, I'm not sure like your purpose, the frustration, and the market timing kind of align here?
Yeah. Well, I would say this was more of what I did when I was consulting from a PR perspective. I can't tell you how many times, I always said when I was meeting with a client for the first time in my communication business, I always said, I'm going to be the person who tells you what you do not want to hear. Because a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times a natural food brand comes to me and they say, this is how we want to promote our product. And I'm like, and granted, a big part of the process was getting all the science down and understanding the research and speaking with the experts and all that. But very often, not more often than not, but very often, what they thought was going to be the key to promoting their business, there wasn't really the support and the credibility for that to be the basis of their promotional stance. And yes, I did have to have those hard conversations.
Mm-hmm. So in closing here, as people enter a new season, we look at everything on from a sports analogy. Entering 2023, they're thinking about getting a coach. They're thinking about, hey, maybe I should just try and, go it alone, or maybe I can lean on a board member, or I can lean on an advisor. What's your, I wouldn't say pitch, but what's like your narrative to say, look, now's the time to invest in yourself. Now's the time to really think about, take a time out. Let's actually like methodically think about where you're heading, because a lot of companies don't take time outs. A lot of companies just kind of do the same thing, remanufacture their budget, which they never hit. So there's been enough PR around getting a coach. Why do what would you say to somebody, that's basically kind of slogging along, maybe growing with the industry or not growing, to say, now's the time to kind of saddle up, and this is what the bigger companies are doing.
Yeah. I think every person, it could be, we could be talking about the president of the United States. We can be talking about a CEO of one of the world's most, known companies. Every single person has like these internal obstacles that get in the way. They could be the most successful, high achieving people, but we all have these things that, are based on internal assumptions we may have, but we all have these obstacles that cause us to be in our own way and actually prevent us from getting there. And a good coach is the person who is going to, you may come to coaching with this aspirational goal of this is what you want to achieve, but there's something underneath there that is preventing you from getting there. And that's what coaching's all about, is like figuring out what is it that is like blocking you. And a coach is the person who will ask the right questions, who will challenge you to kind of unearth that. Because once you unearth that, then you can start putting in the behaviors and the tactics that allow you to go beyond that.
Awesome. Well, it was great to see you in person last month. It's great to have you in the Halo sector at large. The food and nutrition that go in everyone's body is obviously integral to living a healthy lifestyle. As much as we focus on fitness, we're definitely more focused on nutrition and the fuel. So the coaching is a big piece of the puzzle here, I think, into creating great companies and great teams. So we'll have all your information on the show notes, and look forward to seeing you in person. And let's keep, building great businesses and live a Halo lifestyle. So good to see you again.
Good to see you, Pete. Thank you so much. And
Awesome
work that you're doing. So thank you.